This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. It's episode 750. Woo. This week we welcome Andy Osk, Sarah Fanger, Darren Foote, John T. Hall, and John Lapotaire for our Winter Break 2025 highlight show, a 90-minute recap of all the key points, all for free. We've also got the Restoration Industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli, joining us. Before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. Association sponsors are IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification at iicrc.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at eia-usa.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com, BioPlanet at byoplanet.com, Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to report no one correctly answered last week's trivia question. The answer was crown fire, and that's the term used to refer to a type of fire that rapidly spreads through the upper canopy of trees and is often propelled by wind. Here's this week's IAQ Radio Trivia question. In what year did the IAQA Hall of Fame inductions begin? Back to you, Joe.
Interesting. All right, so today we've got John T. Hall. He's got over 25 years in the roofing, waterproofing, and coating industries, and he's provided technical support, training, and consulting in over 30 countries worldwide. Sarah Fanger, she's the executive director of the Indoor Air Quality Association, also has a nice background in water damage restoration and indoor air quality. Andy Osk, most of our audience knows Andy. He's a professional engineer, a mechanical consulting engineer who specializes in the retrofit and remediation of HVAC systems in buildings. John Lapotaire, who is a building envelope and indoor environment consultant, providing IAQ consultation for commercial and residential properties. And Darren Foote, who is the founder and president of Remediation Training and Consulting. I think I did it. Pete, let me turn it over to you to give a little quick summary of why we put this all together and what we're going to do today.
Yeah, so in the odd years, we have two events during the winter break. We got the Building Science Symposium, and then we do some other kind of event. The last few years, it's been more restoration related and also involved with the moisture mop. In the even years, it's usually kind of one event. It's more intended for restoration, mold, and all that. I mean, there's always building science mixed in, no matter how you look at it, because it kind of transcends all the different industries and professions that kind of make up doing building inspections and home building and restoring damaged property. So there was a link between the Building Science Symposium, which was the first 2 days of the week, and then this interactive workshop we did on doing building envelope inspections. I think the key thing, the two were very complementary. They weren't competitive. Number one, they had different audiences. The first one had an audience with home builders, architects, HVAC guys, and there were restoration and mold assessor types mixed into that too. And so Joe Stiebrick and John Straub spoke very specifically the latest best practices on design, construction, and for buildings to operate smoothly, effectively, etc. The second program, which dovetailed off of that, was really just done by practitioners, people boots on the ground, how to perform the different aspects of a moisture survey, and looking at the building from the roof to the slab or the slab to the roof, however you want to do it, and then the entire building envelope, starting with the enclosure, the cladding systems, the windows, from the roof all the way down to the different flooring and substrates, and then all the materials inside, the wood materials, concrete materials, and everything that affects doing a moisture survey and impacts the building by either humidity, rain, wind-blown rain, bad pooling, etc., by doing hands-on demonstrations, actually showing the process and training people to give them good, accurate information on that. And that particular audience had several roofers in there, had restoration companies, it had mold assessing type, inspector type people. We also had one construction defect attorney, and we also had a property manager. So that was a unique mix of people that came to that. We learned from each other, and we had leading experts in each of the areas with that. So we kind of tried to create this bridge, and then we called it Winter Break Week because it was a combination of two back-to-back events that were in the regionally close area, but were two distinctly different events. So I think today on the show, the panel I put together with the 5 people, Joe, has a unique perspective, and some of them were both showings, some were at only one, and it was a bridge. So, Andy, I think we're going to kick off with him, and he's going to talk about his vision in the years that he's put together this symposium and brought in guys like Steve Brook and Straub and a lot of other experts in that area with the home builders. And then we have Sarah Fanger, the executive director of IQA industry, and she'll talk from her perspective. Darren Foote, he's the vice chair of IICRC standards. IICRC was a sponsor at the first event and offered CECs for them and RAA for both events. And then John T., roofing expert, and he's kind of was my partner on the two of us. We kind of co-hosted the second event. He'll kind of weigh in with his thoughts on that.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Well, I'm not sure what that is. And then, of course, John Lapotaire, they gave one of the best presentations, John. I've seen John present a lot, was just fabulous on the building envelope and dealing with windows and stuff. And the case study was great. So I think we got a great panel today. I'll turn it over to you, Joe, and do round robin, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Pete. Let's go to Andy Osk. Andy, always great to see you back. You've been on the show. It's been a little while.
Yeah, probably since last winter break.
All right. So what's the secret to being able to get Joe Stevebrook and John Straub both to speak at the same event?
Well, since he's here, I think the secret is knowing Pete Consigli.
Okay.
No, I developed a relationship with both of them over the years. I've been going to the building science summer camp now, not quite 25 years, 27 years. And Joe, I'm a little closer to. He's been coming to Fort Myers since 1998, the first time when we had our first building envelope seminar. So it's been 27 years we started this. And this is about our 20th event. But
Andy, over that, you're talking 25 years when people didn't even know what building science was,
That's correct.
And still many don't today, but a lot more do. Can you kind of tell our audience a little bit the historical perspective, how things have changed over that 25 years, if they have changed?
Oh, yes. And I think, speaking for the people who have participated in our building science symposium over the years, I think we have effected change, certainly in Southwest Florida. The buildings used to be loose and poorly and didn't have much insulation. And when they didn't, in the winter, heat drove through the walls and going out. In the south, heat in the summer drove heat through. That dried the walls out. Now we insulate the dickens out of the buildings. They have to be absolutely airtight for a variety of reasons. The walls do. So now we make in Florida, the walls are cooling. We keep the heat out. There's no heat to dry. So we got to keep the moisture out of the walls. And then whatever moisture in, we got to figure out how to keep it from condensing and keep it from leaking. Of course, these buildings use a lot of energy. So we're not driving that. The need for reducing energy, the need to decarbonize is driving how we build buildings. We don't decide that. But every one of these changes is making it much harder to keep the building from self-destructing and, of course, from having high humidity and contamination for the people inside. So what we've changed is figured out how to work within those parameters. In other words, we do all those things, insulate the building, make it tight, and we prevent condensation.
Andy, I know this is a tough question, but and we didn't prepare for this, but I just, after hearing what you said, it made me very focused on this. How much do you think over the last 20, 25 years, the things you just talked about, tightening up the building, air sealing, all that, how much do you think that's added to the increasing costs for new homes?
Oh, I think it's added certainly to the initial cost. Yes, I don't know what I don't think it's a number. It'd be a big number. Yes.
And that, but I think what people don't oftentimes take into consideration is that over the long haul, you're actually going to save money by doing those things.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess our part of it is doing it correctly. In other words, we didn't invent insulation. We didn't invent weatherization. The trick is to do all that and keep the building from destroying itself. In other words, it doesn't do any good to save energy if the building rots or if the people inside get sick.
Yeah, well said, Andy. Let's move on. We got Darren Foote, the founder and president of Remediation Training and Consulting. Darren, you're the only one that has never been on the show before that I can remember, unless you were on a panel that I forgot about many years ago. It's great to have you back. You're also, well, tell folks what you do at the IICRC. You're also on, is it the consensus board or on one of the standards?
Yeah. So, and it's interesting after all the years of watching this show to hear that opening music and know that I'm sitting here with this group. It's kind of a cool thing. So I appreciate that very much. I've got a couple functions and roles in the IICRC right now. I'm on the IICRC board of directors. I am the standards vice chair, and then also sitting as a consensus body, the authoring body member of the S500 for water damage.
Okay, let's get your thoughts on. I think you've been to Pete's event before, but what were some of the key takeaways for you from the 2025 winter break?
You know, I haven't. Pete's been chasing me. I'm sorry, Pete's been inviting me for a long time to one of these events, and my schedule's just never worked out. I've had other associates that have said, "How are you not going to these? It's the most important thing in our industry." And it was pretty powerful to be there, and you realize some of the things you know, and a lot of things you thought you knew or didn't know, or are trying to now figure out to go through. When you've got a Strebeck-Leisterbeck or a Straub-Strebeck tag team going back and forth with all the different information that they had, it was an amazing thing as they just moved from one to the other with every aspect of the built environment was pretty incredible. And then to have Andy interject and share how pulling it all together was just a really great event for me to be at. And then to move over to the Moisture Mob and see all the things that took place there and the different aspects and how, I'm in the restoration world, but obviously there's a lot of times where you've got, John Lapotaire talking about envelopes and John Holt talking about roofs and all the things there. It was just those two together either one was an amazing event, but those two together was just a great experience for me to be at.
Have you ever seen Steebrook and Straub speak before?
I've seen Strebeck on the internet a lot, to watch those videos, but to be there live was a great thing.
Yeah,
but let me weigh in on that, Darren. When you took the WS class, that was when Steebrook did a full one-day building science back in the day. So you spent a whole day with him. It was a while ago, but that was something.
It was a while ago, and I'm getting old. It was more than 12 minutes ago, Pete. I don't remember, but yeah. So just hear him speak correctly. He was definitely involved with the WLS when I was there.
Darren, real quick, I'm curious because I'm big into education, and you are doing, we talked before the show, you're doing IICRC courses, I guess. Is it the water restoration technician? And
yeah, so our company that we really do day to day is Learn to Restore, and we do everything. I primarily teach water, but every IICRC class we're doing out there with various very good instructors.
What I'm curious about is the changeover to, after COVID or during COVID, the changeover to remote learning. How do you see that going? You're on the board there, you're on the consensus board. Will that continue? Is that something that IICRC is going to allow to continue? I mean, it used to be they focused real heavily on that classroom training.
It's a great question. The classroom training obviously is always going to be classroom training. Being there eyeball to eyeball is a great way to teach. Just to clarify, the remote training with live stream training was not directed by COVID. It was impacted. About 8 or 9 months before COVID hit, I was already on a committee looking to take it to an online format for several of our courses. COVID simply accelerated that very quickly. We had about an 8 or 9 month window, and we pulled it back down to we've got to get this going right now because of the impact. So we're seeing a bigger uptick in live classes again, probably about 50-50, I'm guessing. But it's not going anywhere. There's certain classes that will always have to be live. The ASD, the applied structural drawing, the applied microbial remediation technician. But for us, I can speak for how we're doing it with lots of cameras and lots of stuff in the classroom. It's been a very effective way to allow people to get information without having to get a hotel and an airplane. So they'll both continue to move forward in their own realm.
Okay. Hey, it's great to have you. And I know you've got to leave a little early, so I wanted to spend a minute with you at the start of the show here, and then we'll try and catch you again before you've got to go.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, let's go over to Sarah Fanger. Sarah is the executive director of the Indoor Air Quality Association, and you made it down for winter break, I guess, or you wouldn't have been part of the panel here, right, Pete? I'm curious, Sarah, what did you learn over this several days event?
Well, I learned that is the place to be to meet all these folks who shake and move in the industry. For one thing, I sat through the building science portion. Unfortunately, I wasn't there for most of the moisture mapping section, but maybe next year I'll be able to attend all of that. I learned a lot about building science, even though I've been in this industry for a number of years. I didn't have a very strong building science background when I got into it, and really everything comes down to building science when you get right down to it in this business. So I couldn't have asked for better speakers.
Now, did you go to both events?
Fantastic. Hey, Joe,
yes.
Let me weigh in on that. Sarah registered for the Andy's event, the building science event. And one of the gentlemen who's on the call here, Stanley from Northern Virginia, him and his son actually came for the whole week. Stanley is, I believe, next in line maybe to be the IAQA president. I actually asked him to call in today. So Stanley, welcome. I'm glad you did. So so Sarah's flight was leaving like late in the day. So we invited her to come to the Moisture Map workshop for the first half of the day. So she was there for that. Got to see a little bit of it. Of course, Stanley stayed for the whole event, and we're talking with Sarah and her role at IAQA for next year to involve the different associations, involve more people in the event next year. The winter break will be the one event, and it will actually be at the Naples Hilton. And me and John T and others are already in the planning stages. And so anyway, I appreciated Sarah coming and staying over. And we had a couple other guests and industry dignitaries, if you would, who stayed for Andy's event, came a little bit. We had like a little speaker area, a bullpen area where they can hang out, and they kind of came and go. So anyway. All
right, let's go to John T. Hall. John, you were helping actually with coordinating all this. It's such a strain and stressful to put these together. I wonder if you could give us your quick overview of how you thought the event went, and maybe a key point or two that you picked up from one of the other speakers that you thought, was something you hadn't thought about before.
Oh, absolutely. Appreciate it. It's good to be on. Yeah. With any event that Pete does, that it's going to be thorough, it's going to be well planned, and there's going to be a lot of forethought and planning that goes into it. So I can assure you the things that he thinks about and covers, and the detail of his planning is I've never seen it in the 30 years I've been in the business. So it's a well-oiled machine, but there is a lot to oil, on these events. But so no, I was glad to be a part of it, and glad to get to know some of the attendees and speakers much better than I already did. To your point about things I picked up, there's a lot of every time some of these speakers, Bob Higgins, Dr. Moon, John Lapotaire, I've heard them all speak before, and every time you hear them, you pull something else out of it. I mean, John Lapotaire, I'm a big proponent of, I believe our industries really need to continue to cross-pollinate more. Darren was talking about education. I do a lot of education. I think education and communication are like the top of the pyramid, for me, the things I focus on. And then we have to share that communication, that education with people in the trades, the manufacturers, the people on the industry side, and then the owners. Because, at the end of the day, the trades, the manufacturers, the specifiers, they're the ones that have the knowledge and get it done, but the owners have to pay for it. And it was nice at this event to see some property management and attorneys and some people other than just the designers, specifiers, and subject matter experts there. So, because it takes everybody to get this done. And then those folks understanding, the building envelope is a dynamic whole thing. It's not just the walls, the insulation, the mechanicals, the floors, the roof. They all have a critical part in this dynamic thing that we call a building. And the more that we're able to cross-pollinate and educate the adjacent experts and the people that actually operate these buildings about that dynamic thing we call the building, I think that the better performing and healthier and more quality buildings and life we're going to have. And these events did that.
You kind of start at the top of the building. You're the roofing guy.
Absolutely.
And, Cliff did a blog after the event and put some key points together. And I think this week's blog will be it'll be a real treasure for our audience, because there's a lot of really, really good information in there. I picked up a couple things from his key points from your presentation. And I wonder if you could talk to our audience a little bit about, one was about the best time to do thermal imaging on a roof, which I think a lot of people would like to be better at, things like checking thermal images and thermal imaging. And can you talk to our audience a little bit about the best time to do that? And then also, I noticed there were a couple types of roofs, particularly with like ballasts on, et cetera, that really kind of messed with that thermal imaging. Can you talk to our audience a little bit about that?
You bet. Just quick summary. So to do thermal imaging, and that's kind of when people talk about doing a moisture survey on roof, they often will say thermal imaging or infrared, even though there's other technologies out there, because it's the most kind of well known. But, to kind of break it down simply, for thermal imaging to work, the roof or the wall, but the roof has to absorb heat all day, absorb energy. So sunny days, clear days, days that aren't cloudy, the roof will absorb more heat than it will on cooler or cloudier days. A darker roof will absorb more heat than a white roof or a reflective roof. And today we put a lot of reflective roofs on for energy efficiency. So we're installing more energy efficient, more, cooler roofs. And those roofs are more difficult to use thermal imaging on because they absorb less heat. Because the way that works, that roof will absorb heat all day long. And then at sunset, when the sun goes down and that direct heating is removed from that roof, then the roof stops absorbing heat and it will start allowing heat to escape. And where there was moisture in the roof, that moisture will release energy at a different rate than dry insulation will. So that's what gives us our difference in our thermal imaging. That's what we're reading, is the different stored energy that's being released back out into the atmosphere. So, ideally, we want to catch them right after dark when the roof has the most stored energy in it and it just starts releasing it. And we want hot, sunny days, and the darker the roof, the better. Now, if there's, you mentioned ballast, if there's gravel and ballast and other things on top of the roof, those things can create false positives. They create, heat sinks, and they kind of mess with that release rate of energy, and so they can really be deceiving to an accurate thermal imaging scan of a roof.
I also noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like some of these green roofs are really tough to diagnose because the thermal imaging just doesn't work properly on a roof that's got vegetative material growing on it. But you tell our audience, please.
No, absolutely. I mean, in theory, those roofs are wonderful. And when they're maintained, they're great. So, a vegetative roof, they basically go and they have to use multiple levels of roofing membranes and trays. They put soil, they put, plants, trees, shrubs. Well, if you've got all that, you're having to water you're having to water the shrubs. So you're going to detect that water. You're not going to detect water in the roof. So there's really no way to get through that. The other thing with these vegetative roofs is, they're very expensive to install, but then you also have to maintain them. And, so you have to water them, weed them, care for them. And if that commitment, that budget's not there, then these things start dying and going into ill repair. And I've actually seen them become fire hazards on roofs.
I wonder, just real quick, because we're getting close to halftime and I want to get John Lapotaire in here before halftime. Do you see those becoming more or less popular because of those issues?
They're definitely, it has to be the right client. I don't think we'll ever see vegetative roofs as mainstream or even, in the top. I don't think we'll see them on more than 1% of the roofs on commercial roofs. Sure. Public buildings, Fortune 50 companies, people like that have the budget and the commitment.
So you think it's going to be kind of stay where it is? The people that have the big money, the government agencies, et cetera, they'll put them on, but others are just not going to do it.
That's it.
Okay, let's go to John Lapotaire. Hey, buddy, long time no see. John's our building envelope guy, and I've gotten rave reviews on your window presentation. So we started at the roof. We're working our way down, talking a little bit about the walls and the windows. John, can you give us a little teaser? We're going to get into a little more detail in the second half, but maybe tell us a little bit about anything you learned at the event this year. And then in the second half, we're going to put a couple slides up that you presented.
First, I was sorry to have missed Andy's building science program with Joe and John, but we had a couple of clients right there in South Florida that required us to make some site visits before the moisture mob winter break. But it's always nice to get together with these guys and listen in. You learn so much every time you listen to these guys talk. Oddly enough, John T., we were just talking about living roofs. They're pulling them off of the Carrabba's. They're just not selling as well as they used to. They look good for a little while though. But no, it was a great program. The way that Pete and John put the program together from the roof to the slab, we were able to cover a lot of information and learn from each other. And I love giving people the information that I have. I just absolutely love it.
Why do you focus so much on windows, John?
Well, it's not that we focus on windows. It's that we work for a lot of home builders, being a home builder and now consulting for home builders. The one thing they do is consistently build horribly. So they've kept me in business as a consultant for 24 straight years. And now it employs both of my sons, myself, and my wife. And we're just constantly hunting window leaks. And if you look at some of the slides that we're going to look at after the halftime, these window leaks don't manifest at the window. They manifest at the floor. And if they're at the second floor, they manifest at the ceiling of the first floor. So a lot of times they're overlooked. People don't realize that the window is actually what's leaking. So it's not that we focus on them. It's just that they are a hole in the wall, and that's where the water usually comes in.
Gotcha. Let's go to halftime, Grayson. We're going to stop and thank our sponsors. We'll be back with our guests. We've got John T. Hall, Sarah Fanger, Andy Oss, John Lapotaire, Darren Foote, and of course, Pete Consigli. Association sponsors are the Environmental Information Association. EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at eia-usa.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com. Improving human, animal, and environmental health with electrostatic spray technology and advanced chemistries at byoplanet.com. Tramex meters, innovation in moisture detection and humidity monitoring systems since 1974 at tramexmeters.com. I also want to quickly thank Tramex for being a sponsor, but I know they were also a big sponsor for Pete and the Moisture Mob and the Moisture Mob conference down there. Let's go to the Z-Man. I want to turn it over to you, Cliff, and see if you have any questions for our guests or any of your thoughts on how things went and what you learned.
Well, no, I have compliments to the guests and compliments to Pete and John and also to Andy, for the organization and planning and commitment that went into putting on the events. It was always great. I really look forward to going there and have a good time when I'm there. I had just many takeaways. I have, I don't know, 13 pages.
Yeah, I read
them. of takeaways, and actually hearing the conversation today, I get even more takeaways because it reminds me of certain things that I didn't jot down and kind of gets into new ones, but just really well done from start to finish. The camaraderie. I think oftentimes the best part of the event really is kind of like the after stuff, and Pete kind of organizes these dinners. They're kind of everyone pays their own way, but you just end up at a table and you meet new people and you start talking to them and you exchange business cards and stories and so on and so forth. And that's really, I mean, you have two parts of it. You have the education, which is always great, and then you have these phenomenal networking activities, and you really make friendships for life. But I just have so many takeaways. I mean, for every one, I have pages and pages of takeaways. I'm glad to go through them if you want. You think we have time?
Let's come back to that.
Okay.
Because I want to get Darren Foote back on because I think he's got to take off here very soon, and I want to ask Darren real quick. You do structural drying. That's one of your big areas there, and we've had one of the working from the roof down to the floor. We've had one of the speakers there on the show several times, Bob Higgins. And I'm wondering, Darren, if you got a chance to see Concrete Bob and if anything he said kind of changed anything in your training that you'll be doing in the future, or maybe if you're going to add a little something. What were your thoughts?
So unfortunately, we had Bob Lockyer there that is on the ISRC board, as well as over the inspections. And I heard some of the stuff he done concrete. I had an IICRC call was scheduled I couldn't get out of, and I wasn't able to do that. So what I saw was good, but I don't have a lot of good input on that, unfortunately.
Well, it's too bad because while you were gone, Concrete Bob was kind of talking about where Jimmy Hoffa is, and so you kind of missed that. So we're not going to let you in on that secret.
That's probably best.
Okay.
Pete, you're an old restoration guy. I wonder, you've listened to Bob a lot. You talked to Bob, you heard his presentation, you looked over his presentation. What's the key points that a restoration person needs to understand about concrete and water?
Yeah, well, it's a pretty reoccurring message, and it's pretty simple. It's in the title of his talk, and it's an old political analogy. I don't remember who it was. One of the presidential debates has said it's the economy stupid. So Bob says it's the surface stupid. Now, he means that in tongue in cheek, not in an offensive way. And what's come out of all of his research and science is that it's about determining the moisture in the surface of the concrete. But there's so many variables that involve the age of the concrete, the mix, the type, what it's been through. And all these are the determining factors. Anyone who's in the restoration business knows that dealing and trying to dry concrete is about one of the toughest challenges that we have to face. And the big thing is determining what the criteria is going to be to determine if it's dry. So ASTM's going through that, the IICRC is going through that, and possibly ASHRAE and other organizations of how the concrete, the moisture in the concrete impacts this. I remember years ago with Steve Brook, he said concrete is the most. I think he said concrete's the most absorbent material in the world of all the construction materials. He first started by saying, how much wood, how much moisture will wood absorb? And the answer was that it depends on how tall the tallest tree in the world is, right? But he said with concrete, something along these lines, and I asked him about it not too long ago. He said, if they built a concrete pole from here to the moon and they put it in water, eventually the water would go all the way up to the moon. And it was trying to kind of make a point that there's just a lot dealing with concrete. What Bob does, Bob looks at the chemical activities, the pH, and all kinds of other interactions. A lot of the issues with the concrete really relate back to the pour, the mix, a variety of situations like that. So Bob gives the science, and he calls out people when they get stuff wrong, when they
yeah, he's tough on people.
Right, whether it's accidental or on purpose. Sometimes people they just interpret the science wrong, and he pretty much sticks to his lane on that. He doesn't get off too far off into other areas, and he deals with concrete in a number of industries. That's another thing, so
I guess the thing
he's quite an interesting guy.
The thing I get.
Let me say one other thing, Joe.
Go ahead, Pete.
The other thing that he does, he backs up everything that he says with citations.
Yes.
And I've managed this citation document now for about 5, 6, 7 years. I remember when he first did some presentation at the winter break in 2022, which was the first one after the pandemic. We had a lot of people between mold assessors and mold remediators, because of course it was approved for the state of Florida licensing, who he challenged their existing way that they looked at it. He had all these citations. When it came time to ask questions, everybody in there was scared. Nobody asked a question. Look, I said, nobody has any questions. Later on, they said, well, we're afraid to ask with 250 people in the room because Bob's going to chew us up. I said, well, don't look at it like that. During the lunches, the speakers and the attendees sat together. We had all the citations out. So that citation now has 18 points in it. It's going to be included as part of the blog, and we share it openly. So all the statements that he makes, he has the citation that says this is where it came from. And it's not made up stuff. It's not made up science. This is where we get it from. And anyway,
I get the impression from interviewing Bob a bunch of times and discussing that, and I want to go back to Darren if he's still here, and Andy, I want to catch you one more time before we lose you too. But anyway, I get the impression that he feels that maybe the restoration guys aren't that the use of moisture meters on concrete when done properly is really probably like almost the gold standard anymore. I mean, if you have a proper meter and you use it properly, you can do a lot more than what I think we thought without drilling holes and without some of the other. Now, of course, you also have to look at the temperature and relative humidity in the room and so on. But I don't know, Pete or Darren or whomever can maybe comment on that.
Well, hold on, Darren. I'll turn it to you. But look, here's the thing. Bob is a very big favorite for gravimetrics. Several years ago when we had the symposium in Ireland, Mickey Lee did a presentation, and Lou Herman too, but they took all the different meters and all the hygrometers and all the manometer, all these different things, and they did their own kind of consumer reports, if you would,
yes,
rating all of them, which were good, better, et cetera, shared that with a whole group of people that ultimately became the core of the moisture mop. And so it's that kind of level of interaction that where, people get to make their own determinations on what they want to do. So Bob, he's very precise and very anal about knowing how to use the meters, how to interpret properly. And there isn't a lot of training that comes with these things. So we kind of try to integrate that in. But Darren, why don't you, I know the IICRC is working on this. The concrete is a big issue. And there's a lot of people from the flooring industry, not just restoration, but the general flooring industry and the concrete specialty, who are all concerned and trying to collaborate in this. Let us know what's going on, or what do you think should happen, Darren? What's going on, all that kind of stuff. Go ahead.
It's a great thought. Obviously, one of the things we've talked as instructor for years about is you see people using a typical moisture meter on concrete, and it doesn't have the depth. It's not designed for that. It's just not going to really do what it's supposed to do. We've seen meters now that are specifically designed for concrete, and the new STM standard for that. And so that's a huge deal because, in my opinion, concrete, it's not the concrete. The water in the concrete is not the problem. It's what's going to go on top of the concrete that creates the problem, whether it's going to seal the moisture in or whether it's going to track that moisture and pull it out and damage a floor or have some sort of an issue. And so, and the issue of the difference between a new pour and an old concrete when it gets re-wetted from water intrusion events. So we do have a task force right now that's working on that very fact to say how do we know? How do we know what it is and what it isn't and use those various things? So it is nice to see that meters are taking a more prominent role with the new technology that's out where they can give a lot more accurate information. So I see some good things coming out of that in the next, probably, hopefully, relatively near future.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Tramex here because they are a sponsor and they have really worked hard at getting those meters, the correct meter for the correct job. And if you use the correct meter on concrete, it can really give you a lot of great information. Darren, real quick, didn't IICOC, don't they have a new course on moisture and a new standard, or is that done, or is it in the process? Where are we at?
It's not a standard. It's the Building Moisture Investigation course, and that's what it's about. Is more on an overall view of how is kind of along the lines of what we did, although maybe not extensively over these seminars we did. But yeah, there is a new course on that about building moisture using meters, where the moisture is getting in, how to find it. And if I could just real quick, kind of, I mentioned I've got to leave here in a few minutes, but that's one thing I really appreciate about these two, meetings I was able to attend. Is you had the overview of everything we talked about, from the roof to the foundation, where you've got planned and unplanned openings and all the different ways that moisture can get in and do the damage that it does. But then we also had speakers using a practical application where you've got, again, the John's talking about testing the roof and how the windows are leaking. At some point they're going to. Andrew talking about with the meters and the practical application of how to use the meters, and Dr. Moon talking about the using the benefits, but also limitations of ATP. And when you're doing your report, you've got to write it in such a way to tell a story. You might understand it, but if the people that are reading a report don't understand it, it doesn't do any good. And so it was such a great overview of not just what's happening in the building, but how to understand it, how to present it, and how to move forward is one of the takeaways that I had.
That's a great takeaway. That I don't think I've ever heard anyone put it that way, but that you've got to tell a story with your report. I think that's a great takeaway, Darren. I appreciate that. Pete, I'm sorry. Did somebody jump in?
Well, I think that was Andy.
Andy, I wanted to go to him next anyway because
go ahead. Go to Andy.
Andy, real quick, are you still with us?
Yeah, sure am.
Andy, what's the soup du jour in the building science world today? What are we looking at and trying to understand still?
Well, everything. You're a teacher, aren't you, Joe?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. We're finding the need to be, frankly, to be repetitive. People come to these seminars, they say, well, what's new this year? Well, what's new is what the kid forgot during summer vacation that you got to start over again with in September. And I think what's changed in my thinking, just putting together this last few months, putting together our 2025 symposium, is I've probably been trying to drill too deep, trying to make everybody an expert in everything. Some of the stuff is pretty hard, like that Joe and John talk about. I think it's probably more important that a lot of people know a little bit about this. That's what's changing in my mind. In other words, when I go around, I see that, whenever I see a production builder, they're making mistakes of things that we knew about 25 years ago. We get new people coming out, and there's just an awful lot of people that don't get this yet. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I mean,
in fact, you opened my eyes there, Andy. I think that's a really important point you're making. That,
I mean, did you do that, Joe, when you were teaching high school? I mean, the kids would come back in September, and you'd have to start over, right, with where you were in May.
Absolutely, and a lot of those kids may have skipped school or missed class, or they were sick or whatever, And I think the same thing happens in our industry. I think that's a really important and a point that I didn't even think about. But I'm always looking for.
Well, neither did I, and I'm remiss. Now, more, I think the answer you're looking for is we probably need to move on from energy, saving energy to decarbonization. And when we talk about decarbonization, all of us have got to think a lot deeper. Actually, stuff that I'm not going to, in my lifetime, I'm really not going to master. But for example, I love foam insulation. Everybody knows that. Right? When in doubt, we want to in the hot humid climate, we've got to use spray foam is the only thing that's going to work. It's going to seal up the attic and keep the moisture out. But foam is made out of petroleum, and it doesn't deteriorate in the landfill. It'll probably be in the landfill 1,000 years from now. So people like me have got to think about that when we apply it. Is there another product we could be doing with? And we probably could. We talked about wood at the seminar. Generally speaking, we consider that a no-brainer for carbon, right? Trees absorb carbon. We use wood. That doesn't. We're not expending any other fossil fuel to make the product. We make steel or concrete. But then, as John Straub pointed out, gee, we cut down the tree. Now the tree can't absorb carbon anymore. And I think the wood eventually does give the carbon back. So it's a cradle to grave thing. We talk about embedded energy. So we're going to have to get a lot more sophisticated in our thinking about how we take carbon out of the atmosphere.
I wonder, in the big picture of building science, I assume, but you correct me if I'm wrong, I assume they're also looking more at sustainability or durability with respect to heat, cold, wind, hurricanes, fires, etc.
Yes, the resilience is probably more of an immediate issue with us on the coast in Southwest Florida than resilience. It's not hard. We got to figure out how to build buildings that don't blow down in hurricanes.
And maybe they're up off the ground. Are you seeing more of that as well to stop from flooding?
Yeah. On the beach, your first floor now is up around 18 feet up to the ground.
18 feet.
Yeah. Every house has got an elevator. We work on the beach. We work for rich people. We don't deny that. In other words, as I told John Straub once, I feel guilty about the work I do. Basically, what I do is I help billionaires use 10 times their share of the world's resources. And John says, well, Andy, don't feel so bad. You're keeping them from using 100 times their share of the world's resources.
That's a good point, John. I like that.
But it's just incredibly expensive, incredibly difficult to build on the beach. And now I'm getting to social issues that are way beyond me. Building on the beach, and I think you guys see this in some of your neighborhoods too, where you work, is we're developing communities like on the beach in Florida, on Sanibel Island, where everybody can come. Yeah, come on down from the north. So anybody that wants to pay cash for their house and run bare without insurance, come on in. We got a place for you.
Yeah, it's an interesting quandary that we're in here.
Joe, before I turn the mic back over to you, first of all, I just think a couple things to say. I did not put on this symposium. Pete works his butt off, but the real energy behind this is Rick and Ricky Sims at Johnson's Air Conditioning in Naples. And they just do this. I don't know why they do it. Pete, we don't know. I think they just think it's a good thing. I mean, they're just trying to make the world better. And I said, I don't want to get the impression that somehow I am doing this. No, I'm not doing this. I'm the face of it. And then just changing the subject. You mentioned Tramix several times. Their meter just has changed everything. Or for me, measuring psychrometrics, in other words, I can get directly to dew point. I can get directly to enthalpy. So this is the difference between like a folding road map you would have in the 1960s when you traveled to your parents to GPS. I mean, it's 30 years ago, their meter, what they do would have been science fiction.
Andy, that I just always appreciate when you come on and your thoughts. And I think that was an important point that you just made there. A couple of them, actually. So we appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you, Joe. All
right, let me think here. I want to read one of these chat messages here. Decarbonization is the future of building construction and rehab work. The question is, what professionals will take the lead on this? That's from Don Weeks. Don, thank you. I think that's a very good point. Let me turn it over to the Z-Man. Cliff, I haven't had a chance to get back to you. Let me see if you have any questions or comments.
No, not really. I mean, it's just, I just like the way that Andy comes up with these very simple to understand explanations, about, what children forget over the summer, and this need to relearn it. He just really has a gift for it. And, I commonly say if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it. He really has a gift for, being able to, put his ideas into words that everyone can understand and appreciate. So well said, well done.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Joe.
Yes, sir. I just want to, real quick, Pete, before we do that, I just want to make sure, John Lapotaire, you're going to be able to stick around and do your window presentation toward the end here?
Yeah, sure. I'm not going anywhere.
Great. Okay. Pete?
Yeah. I think the only one that had to take off early was Darren Foote, so it's good that we kind of got him in. Everybody else, Andy, all of them, I think they said they could save it all the time.
I want to go to Sarah next, but go ahead, Pete.
The thing that I wanted to say that kind of dovetail off what Cliff was saying has to do with, and Higgins constantly reminded of this, it's all about the basics and the fundamentals. And we actually oftentimes assume that people know this stuff, whatever this stuff is in air quotes.
Yep.
Okay. Where it became very obvious to me, Higgins and John T, about 1.5 years ago, we started, John moved some of his certification roofing classes to Jacksonville, to Baytex delivery site up there. And me and Bob did some just impromptu little stuff in building science and concrete. And we could see the eyes glaze over of some of the roofers. And in one of the classes, there are a couple of the largest roofers, commercial roofers in the state of Florida. And then through John T, and he maybe commented some and said, this stuff is really great, this building science stuff. I kind of thought everybody knew it. Well, then what we realized, and what the whole point of this, the roof to the slab to the roof, is that too many of the different specialty trades don't talk to each other. They don't need to be an expert in something that's not their direct discipline, but they need to have general knowledge. And it kind of starts with the roof. I remember Steve Brick years ago, he always would talk about the architects are designers and they design beautiful buildings. He goes, well, every artist knows the first thing you have to do is don't put your art in the rain. Meaning it starts with putting a roof on a building, because if it rains in the beautiful building, you got a lot of wet materials, and that it kind of gets started on the wrong foot. So one of the things that we've all started to do is we've started to put the basics back in there and integrate that. And every time we talk, because there's always new people coming and going, and the old timers, sometimes they just kind of forget, like Andy brought up. So for the first time in any of these programs, I very rarely, just like Stebrick doesn't present that often at summer camp. When he does, he's got something that he wants to share. Well, I feel the same way. Being a facilitator and a moderator is different than actually being a presenter. Sometimes I don't feel I should present in my own program, but this time I did. And I opened up after I did a general overview, which is a moderator role. I actually gave a presentation on building science fundamentals, the second law of thermodynamics, the stuff I've learned from Stebrick and others over the years. And I integrated it with the understanding the 4 Ps of indoor air quality and what that all means. And I don't know, it was probably 20 to 30-minute presentation. And in essence, what it did, it set the tone for every one of the subject matter experts that came afterwards. They could build off that. I think some of the people in the room, maybe they knew what I was talking about, but I think there were others who didn't, or it reminded them. So this is going to become part of the general training, is always review the principles to start everything off, because if you want to build a pyramid, you have to have a good base. Otherwise it topples. So if you're going to build education, if you're going to, educate yourself and do continuing education and certification, uh, credentials, etc. You got to have a good base, and you got to just remind that, like Cliff says, you got to have the KISS theory. You got to be able to explain it to the fifth grader. And if they don't understand it, or you can't explain it, then the person who's teaching, they don't understand it themselves. And
good point.
Anyway, I think that's important. And I think that when we built this building envelope thing with the moisture mop, the primary audience I built it for were full service restoration contractors. I was also hoping, and this was very similar, Cliff, to when we developed the WLS class way back in the day, 25 years ago. It started with the building science. We were hoping to attract the industry trainers. Well, we did that. There are more WLSs, people certified, who are trainers in the industry than any other certification or category. It's a long, illustrious list, and I'll leave it at that. And I always thank those guys for coming. Well, that's exactly the kind of thing. Well, one of them there, Gary Lloydman's on here. He took the WLS and see his face looking at me, right? And there are many others. And I think it's important that trainers and instructors take the time to educate themselves. Ken Larson made a comment, the reason that he goes to summer camp is so he can learn. And there's other guys like him. They learn from the masters and the experts. Then they train the mass of the audience, the technicians, the people coming up, and the project managers and superintendents that want to be. Because if that information is wrong, like Cliff says, if you parrot something that's wrong, the downfall and waterfall effect of that's what the insurance company used that term, waterfall effect. If something is bad and it's not addressed, it starts a waterfall effect, and eventually that's a tidal wave, and it wipes things out. So that to me is what all of these education and these things are about. And me and Cliff spent our better part of our career advocating for. Oftentimes it falls on deaf ears, but as long as we have a breath in us, we're going to keep advocating that message. So anyway.
All right. Thank you, Pete. And I'm glad you brought up the 4 P's: people, pollutant, pathway, pressurization. I pounded that into a lot of heads a lot of years ago, and I think you bring up a good point. Maybe they're still teaching that, maybe they're not. I don't know, but it was a very simple way to figure out, okay, I've got a pollutant and I've got people. Do I have pathways and pressurization that bring that pollutant into the people's breathing zone, or their ability to touch it, or whatever the case may be? Great point. All right, let me go back. I want to get Sarah Fanger on here for just a minute. Sarah, real quick, if you could just tell our audience a little bit about, I love the fact that IAQA has decided to go to Lexington, Kentucky for their conference this year. Give us the dates, if you would, and what the theme is.
Nope.
Well, we're going to be in Lexington June 1st through 4th, and we're going to be building on what we did last year with a kind of tight general program. We'll have workshops, of course, and we're going to add some social events, some experiences in Lexington, because as Pete has shown us, is the after networking that really builds those relationships. And that's sort of the glue that holds an association together. So we're trying to bring some of that back to our conferences. It shouldn't all just be work. We have to have some fun too.
Do you have a keynote?
We don't have a traditional keynote. We're trying to get right down to the technical presentations. So we've kind of done away with the soft keynote address.
Gotcha. Well, we're looking forward to talking to you more about that as the year goes on.
And in fact, just real quick, this view behind me is the view from the rooftop restaurant in at the Marriott in Lexington. That's why I have this behind me. So
okay.
I think we're going to have some good networking right up here in the restaurant after hours.
And that's the state capitol, I believe.
The building behind us, I think, is the former courthouse for Lexington. It now contains their Convention and Visitors Bureau and a lovely restaurant.
Gotcha. Hey, let's go back to John T. Hall. John, I just wondered, since we talked a minute ago, or 20 minutes ago, there's been a lot of commentary. I wonder if you had anything to add to what we've been discussing.
No, it's been amazing commentary, I, it's funny. I had a few notes down here, and Andy and Pete, and I mean, the theme of this has kind of gone that way. It's like, let's not make this too complicated. Let's make sure that we have more people across the spectrum of the construction industry as a whole that will understand basic building science, and again, how these systems work together. This is exactly what I had hoped to see come from this and continue to come from this kind of movement, if you will, because and like John Lapotaire, his case study. We talked about his case study presentation that he made. I loved that because that crossed so many things. He had an example of, a builder that had come in, and we had roofing issues. We had, flashings that weren't right. We had air movement and dynamic, changes in this building from a change that a builder didn't necessarily, or, didn't understand. And he affected all these systems of a building and caused this harm. So, yeah, I can't echo enough. I'm on board with everything I'm hearing here.
Cliff, let me see if you've got anything to follow up or any
Well,
comments.
I do, because I think that some of the things that I thought John's presentation was excellent, and there were a lot of takeaways that I had, and some of them were pretty simple things, and some of them were things that I never really thought of. And one of the things he said was, your eyes are your most important tool. Don't fix the damage without fixing the problem. And I never knew there was a paper-backed roofing material. And one of the things that Lapotaire brought up is, I was not familiar with a type of this insulating foil that they have down there that's pretty common, that we don't really see in the north. And I never really, you have all these people with these meters, and I think some of them can be dangerous, because I think one of the things I learned from John T. was the fact that, when you're doing a roofing inspection, you have to drill a core in to see, you have to get through all the layers. And a lot of people don't do that. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. And a lot of people don't know how to determine. I think those are the things that John T did in a hands-on way. We went outside, and he kind of demonstrated all this, with the tools and what to look for, and how to deal with it, and how to patch the hole.
That's the key point there that I noticed from your blog that you were writing, that patching that hole is so important, and then getting a professional roofer to come in and make sure that's done right.
And the importance of this annual roof survey. I never really thought about it, but the fact that if you have an annual roof survey, they found that it'll extend the life of a roof 7 years. I mean, think about that. That can be like a 50% increase in the lifespan of a 15-year roof. And then when we got to John's, again, it was the same thing. He talked about windows, but some of the things that he said, similar to what John T said, never be afraid to make a hole and go in, because sometimes you need to look inside of wall cavities, ceiling cavities, interstitial spaces, and so on and so forth, to actually see and figure out what's going wrong. And with John Lapotaire's presentation, I never really thought about it, the fact that windows can get damaged in shipment and can get damaged during installation when they kind of get tweaked a little bit. Never really thought about that. I thought that in Lapotaire's window presentation, about the importance of demonstrating what you found to the customer. And I never knew that, when a lot of these windows are water tested, they actually remove the screens from the windows before they do the water test. And because the screens hold moisture, and if the screens are in during that test, the windows fail. Just stuff like that I never really thought about. I thought he had a great point, and several people mentioned it, which was using this cobalt chloride test paper to check in cracks and crevices and so on and so forth, for moisture levels and to find moisture.
Does it change color, or?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, a lot of times goes from pink to blue, like the silica gel changes. That's what's the reactive silica gel's treated with cobaltous chloride that changes color. When you regenerate it, it's blue, and then when it's moist, it's pink. And I thought that it was great when they had Bob Blankenshire demonstrate how to do an actual moisture test, and just the importance of you never really think about it, but you have to drill a hole in the concrete, and you're going to drill a hole down 40% of the depth, and you should wait 24 hours after you make that hole. Number one, to allow it to equalize, but number two, to allow the temperature to dissipate from the friction that's created, from making the hole. The different standards, I think Bob Higgins and Blockinger and Andrew Reinhardt, explained the differences between the standards. And, Bob Higgins, I thought it was interesting that he was the person that really invented this calcium chloride test, and he kind of wrote the standard on it. Yeah. He was kind of apologizing for it because
now he doesn't like it.
Well, yeah, because what's happened is the concrete's changed. It was written for concrete that was made at that point, and since then the concrete's changed. And again, this goes back to the government. We can kind of blame the government for a lot of these problems. They want to save energy. They don't tell you how to save energy. They just want you to save energy. And with the cement, they have this dust from when the cement's made, this kiln dust.
Kiln dust, yeah.
Yeah, and the government, I think it's the EPA or whatever, has mandated that when they make new cement, they have to put this old ground kiln grindings back into the cement, and it creates problems. And just the fact that concrete has the salts in it, and the salts are soluble and get into the moisture and cause problems. I never knew that when you flew over salt water, the relative humidity is like, if I'm not mistaken, there's a difference between flying over salt water and flying over fresh water. One of them is 70% relative humidity. The other one's 90% relative humidity. I think it's salt water that has the higher.
Hey, Joe.
Yes, sir.
Let me weigh in on a couple things here, as we're kind of probably pretty soon to go to the roundup.
Well, I got to go to John's slides too. So
who?
John Lapotaire. He's got a couple of great. I mean, I keep hearing about this presentation. I want to see the slides.
Well, I said when I first reviewed it, when he sent to me, I've seen John. I said it's one of the best presentations I've ever seen him do. It was very thorough. It was very well received. One of the things that we did with this, and Cliff touched a little bit, we wanted to put as much actually hands-on stuff in there as we could. Some of the hands-on stuff had to be done through case studies, but Blotchinger did 2 ASTM, but the one was the drill test that he was talking about. He got called out in the project, so Andrew Reinhardt finished it up the next morning. But John T., something that he's been doing for years at his regular certification class, and we did this in Australia too. We had to have an area out in the parking lot because they wouldn't let us do it in a hotel, where we brought everyone out there in the afternoon. He did his technical presentation in the morning. Then he actually did a show and tell with roofing materials that were wet, and showed how to do the moisture testing, how to document it with the cloud-based technology, etc. That was a really big hit. Cliff took a bunch of pictures of that, and maybe some of that stuff. I'm thinking, Cliff, when I finalized the actual main blog, not the blog you're doing from this show, but from here, I may enter some photos in there. I'm going to spend a little time and get that out, and then we can kind of integrate that, because we're going to share that with everybody. One of the things that I took a lot of time this year, the proceedings for the workshop went out 2 days ahead of time to all the attendees. I had all the material in. They got copies of all the slides, 2 slides to a page in PDF. That's how they followed along. We only had a few minor little hard copy handouts. And so based on that, they already had the information. Now the blog that Cliff did, that 12 pages, by the time we're done, it'll probably be a few extra pages with some photos. That's going to go to everybody on the site. So not just the people, there's 40 people that were there, but everyone that will tie into this to kind of share the information. It's just out there. I never will have anyone be on my program if they're going to have slides that they're not willing to share with the audience. I just think if that's the case, now then the secret magic, no, they got to be able to share what they put up there. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of doing it. So those hands-on things were very, very important. I'll turn it back over for you to John. And then when we go into the roundup, I have a couple little things I want to say at the end. And, give Sarah, John T., everybody else, Andy on here if they want. The one other suggestion I have is so Stanley's on here. He's been on for the whole call, and he sat through the whole week, including when Sarah had to leave for the workshop. He's going to potentially possibly be the next president of IQA. You may want to bring him in the roundup at the very end and give him a couple of seconds just to share his thoughts. He's a very experienced building investigator. Anyway, I think he has an interesting take and stuff.
All right. Thank you, Pete. Hey, real quick, John Hall. And then while we're talking to John, Grayson, if you could get ready for John Lapotaire's slides. John, real quick, I was thinking about this while others were talking. Are roofing inspectors like you and roofing companies using drones a good bit? And do they have drones with thermal imaging cameras so that they can, look at a whole roof?
They do. Drones are in use, so they're pretty widespread. One of the things you mentioned and John Lapotaire and I both mentioned was, keep in mind that infrared information is comparative. We're seeing differences one to the other. So it's still really, really important. And a lot of people don't do this. You have to get up there. You have to do destructive testing. You have to actually, look, feel, taste, smell. Let's measure some moisture content. Let's measure some relative humidity inside that roof to see what that drone imagery is telling us. But absolutely.
You anticipated my question. That was great. Because I was looking at, okay, what's the downside of using these drones? You got to get up there. You still got to touch, taste, feel. That's a great point. All right, let's get back to John Lapotaire. John, I want to tease this presentation because we want to do a future show with you and go through your whole presentation, but we're going to give people a little tease on what you did with respect to windows at Pete's event here. So let's put up the first slide. John, do we still have you?
Yeah, I'm still here.
All right, buddy. I'll leave it over to you. I'll hand it over to you.
Well, windows are a lot like a roof. You have to know what your wall assembly is. Most of the time that we're brought in to determine where the water comes from, it's water on the floor. If you look at the bottom, you'll see that you've got the slab, you've got the wood flooring, the vapor barrier, baseboards. That's where the water is going to show up. The question is that water coming in from the exterior grade? Is it hydrostatic pressure that most insurance engineers will tell you? For us, in our experience, it's going to be from windows. And we start by taking the marble sill out. And when we add water, we'll see water right at the corner of the window on the sill. But it makes its way down through the concrete, the CMU block, down, and then it shows up on the floor. And if you use a moisture meter, you're 1.25 inches away from the wet wall. 3/4 inch furring strip, 1/2 inch drywall. And in many cases here in Florida, you'll have 5-foil insulation. So you'll get false positives. And you'll think, well, everything in the wall is either wet or everything in the wall is dry. So you can't really use a moisture meter. And because the 5-foil's in the wall, you can't use a thermal imaging camera at all. But nonetheless, in most cases, people will exclude the window as a contributor because they didn't see anything between the window and the floor because it's all inside the block.
How do you remove that marble sill, John, without breaking it?
So it's set in mortar, and we just tap it just a couple of times on top, and it actually pops that bond, and then you just slowly lift up on it, and they usually come right up. It's rare that we ever break them.
And this is a typical Southeast type of construction. You got a CMU block wall, etc.
Right. We do have other details of insulated concrete forms and wood frame that show basically the same thing. But oddly enough, the wood frame water shows up on the outside of the wall until it gets to the floor. I don't know if you've got that one, John.
We'll find out, but that's an interesting point. So you've got to look at both sides. There we go.
So
this is it.
So here the water's coming in at the window, and it's making its way down between the stucco and the house wrap until it hits the floor and makes its way in.
Interesting. Anything else you want to point out from this slide?
Well, this slide, the stucco is incorrectly installed also, so there's no escape route for the water. So regardless of what we're looking for, we end up looking for how the wall assembly is built. And then we draw these diagrams to show how the wall assembly is and how it's failing. And then we give them another one to show how it needs to be built, because we want to communicate as clearly as we can to our client, or in some cases to an attorney or to a builder, homeowner, This is how the building is failing. This is the why, and this is the how to fix it. Those are the most important things. We can't just say there's water in the exterior wall. But in this case, when we open the walls up, we can start by using the long pins. In wood frame construction, we want to measure the moisture content of the exterior sheathing. And in most cases, people will start by running a moisture meter on the interior drywall. And again, they'll say the window's not leaking because there's no moisture showing up below the window and the floor. It's only showing up on the floor.
And that's not even taking into consideration the time of year. Did it rain within the last month or whatever it may be?
Exactly. People ask me all the time, aren't you going to use your moisture meter? I'm like, it hasn't rained in a week. I mean, I'm not here for a dog and pony show. I'm not pulling a rabbit out of my hat. I'm here to look and see what's going on. So I'll make a hole in the wall and look at the exterior sheathing and say, yep, it's rotting out right below the window all the way down. That's how you get answers to questions. You got to open the wall.
Another dead giveaway on this one, your stucco is down below the grade of the ground.
Right. There's no stucco weep. So yeah, the water cannot escape. So it's trapped inside the wall. This particular house, that wall was substantially rotted.
Oh, I'll bet you put that stucco below grade, you're in trouble.
In trouble.
Let's go to the next one, Grayson. Okay, what do we have here, John?
This is a typical production builder window that was leaking. And if you look down on the bottom picture, you'll see the water coming out of the wall at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did was we simply popped the windowsill and added a little bit of water. It did not take long at all for us to see it in the top corner, but in very short period of time, it was actually manifesting on the floor. And these windows are metal frame windows. The red side rail is connected to the green windowsill by 2 screws and a liquid applied silicone seam sealer. And if these windows, it does not work. When these windows are open during install, that seal is broken. And when I was still building houses, we would have these resealed after install to prevent water leaks.
Interesting. And that's not something the contractor wants to hear.
No.
Let's go to the next one, Grayson. What do we have here, John?
This is insulated concrete forms. This particular house, nothing showed up again until the floor. And when we popped the sill and looked at the insulated concrete forms, the water was actually flowing between the concrete and the form. So we had delamination between the concrete and the form, and the water simply made its way down both sides of the concrete form into the basement floor. And they were trying to figure out, they had done everything they could to try and seal the floor to try and stop the water from coming up through the basement, because that's where most people thought it was coming. But the reality was it was coming from this window and coming down the insulated concrete forms, but nobody could find it because nobody was looking for it in the right place.
And was this strictly the cause for this was strictly the fact that the deteriorated window sealant in 2 places?
Yes, the window opening was not properly waterproofed. It wasn't properly terminated. You don't have a pitched sill, and the window's sitting on a poorly protected treated window buck. So there is an awful lot going on in this picture. The report and explanation was a couple of pages of what not to do with insulated concrete forms. They simply made a square out of window bucks and then stuck the window in. There were no slope sills. There were a lot of things wrong with this window.
Yeah, I don't see any flashing there either, but that could be.
There's nothing.
Nothing.
It's a window in a hole.
Sealant doesn't last forever, huh?
No,
Hey,
it's amazing.
Talking about flashing, remember what Steve Brick says, if you want to save cash, flash.
Right.
Yep. John, or Cliff, I want to make sure you get a chance to jump in. Any follow-ups?
No.
Hey,
I'll give my time to someone else.
Hey, before you go to the roundup, Cliff, there's one person whose presentations were not covered. That's Dr. Moon.
Yeah,
I've
got a bunch of notes. You want me to do?
Yeah, Dr. Moon did 2 great presentations on one of them building off of the Joe Spurgeon, How to Defend Your Report. he showed applied procedures based on research, and he did the tile tapping, he did the ATP stuff, things that were all scientifically peer reviewed. So, Cliff, before we go to the roundup, why don't you give a quick hit on Ralph's two presentations? Then, Joe, I think we would have covered all the presenters.
Great.
Okay.
Let's go ahead,
Yeah,
Cliff.
I saw both of them, and the one that really stuck, to me again was, kind of building on something that he's talked about before, Ralph, and also something that Joe Spurgeon's talked about, how to develop a defensible report. But in terms of doing that, he had some excellent tips, and one was have a clear investigation objective. He talked about being precise with photograph entries and locations and to put together a floor plan. He talked about in the report listing technical and scientific references. He talked about the importance of measurements and using comparative materials in order to do that, like using a ruler. And the IICRC's put out these little plastic they're about the size of a Post-it note that have an arrow on it and have a graduated scale like a ruler and so on and so forth. And actually, John T. talked about it in roofing. You can actually tell they have a lens that has a plastic guide that you put up next to the surface, and you look at it under magnification, and from that you can actually determine the mill thickness of a surface by looking at a side view. Excellent
This is
stuff.
the IICRC piece right here.
Yeah,
There you
very,
go.
and they have
Thank you, sir.
yeah, and very cool. Dr. Moon talked about the historical damage, that it takes materials some time in order to deteriorate. Like it can take tack strip, 7 to 9 months or whatever to deteriorate.
Yeah.
He talked about, what tools to use, the tile tapping. I think one of the most important things about the tile tacking presentation is rarely do you have an installation of tile that doesn't have some debonded tiles from the very beginning. He talked about what tools to use. He said the two best were an antenna from a truck, the radio antenna, the outside antenna.
I found that interesting in your notes. Yeah.
Or a metal ring. Let's see. And in his other presentation.
Hey, Cliff, so the ATP thing that he did, he used about at least he wrote an article, and we did a show in that was peer reviewed. But Claire Bird, kind of a counterpart is from Australia, she did a whole thing in ATP, and he used and credited her about 6, 7, 8 slides on all the things how ATP is misused in the industry. And that is an important point that anyone who wants to do post-verification remediation, they should read those articles and pay attention to that. But he did some other stuff on there, Cliff. What other things you got in the round?
Okay, well, I think, getting back to these best practices for investigations, that the federal rules of evidence are interpretive. And I thought that was really important.
All right. Today's roundup is brought to us by Tramex, tramexmeters.com. Love them. All right. Let's start around the horn here with John T. Hall. John, final thoughts? Anything we missed that you'd like to add? Any final thoughts?
No, I just appreciate you guys having us on again and continuing to get the message out there and really cross-pollinate. This is indoor air quality, and here you have the roof guy on, and I tell this all the time when I'm around restoration guys, like, hey, it doesn't do you any good to dry out and do all this wonderful restoration work if you leave a wet blanket covering up the top of your building. So, so thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate your comment, because I had an esteemed professor once tell me, the one thing I appreciate the most about your show is you bring in people from different silos and different portions. You from the medical people to the roofer to the concrete guy to the IEPs to the restoration guys, and I was really it just made me feel good. We try our best to do that. Let's go to Sarah Fanger. Sarah, final thoughts or comments?
Well, I appreciated John's comment there. I think the fundamental fact is that it all comes down to the people in the buildings. And if we fail at the building envelope, at keeping the 4Ps in mind. And if we don't keep the people in mind, then we've failed at our jobs. There's no point in rescuing buildings if it's not safe for people.
Thank you for that. Amen. Let's go to Andy Osk. Andy, do we still have you?
Yeah, sure.
Final thoughts?
I was delighted by John Lapataire's slides. That's impressive procedures, impressive way he's illustrating them. Tragically, the fix, how to properly install windows so that none of that would ever happen, was known 25 years ago. So just reinforce my own feeling. We got to get a little bit of information out to a lot of people. Those things should never happen.
Well said, Andy. Thank you, sir. Always great talking to you.
Thank you, Joe.
John Lapotaire, before we go, final thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Andy. I think one of the things that comes up when we talk about windows is I remind the builders that there's only one correct way to install the window, and that's according to the manufacturer's specifications, and they were shipped with the windows. So it's not any secret. I appreciate the opportunity every time we get together to share the why. I think that one of the most overlooked things in our industry is the why. We're quick to dry it, clean it, and restore it, but the why. Those are sometimes head scratchers, and that's where we get the call. And most of the people in the room that we're giving these presentations, they're the why people. And when you get the why people together, we love spreading that information. You can't, like Andy said, you can't get that information out to enough people. This is known. This is free information. It's shipped with the windows, but it's always a pleasure to take the opportunity to share with people the pitfalls of trying to figure out what's in a wall assembly and how the water acts when it moves south down a wall assembly.
That's the first thing I look for when I've got a consulting project. Someone wants to know what's wrong with their building. I mean, first thing you look for is those manufacturers' guidance and did they follow that? That's a great point. Thank you, John. And we look forward to getting your full presentation in the future on windows and walls too. I mean, you're the man, so we appreciate it.
I look forward to it.
Before we go, Cliff, I want to get you and then give Pete the last word. Cliff?
I guess a couple of final things. I think one of the things that Ralph talked about was how fast condensation occurs. We don't think about it, but it's literally seconds, when the conditions are right. It's like taking that cold Coke can out of the refrigerator. It happens in seconds, and it happens in seconds inside of the building. One of the things he talked about that I thought was really important in terms of making an inspection is looking at when you look at the outside of the house, there are certain plants, and he's a botanist. That's what his PhD is in botany. But there are certain plants that proliferate in high moisture environments, and when you see those outside, even vines on the side of a home are an indication that there's a whole lot of water around that foundation. Really, really good stuff. It's always a great learning experience, and I'm looking forward to next year.
All right. Thank you, Cliff. And Pete?
Yeah. So
finish it up for us, buddy.
Yeah. One of the things that I integrated into my my opening comments before I moved to the technical presentation I gave was talking about what the winter break experience is and what the interactive model is. And this is something over the course of the last 90 minutes. These are things that Andy commented on, both of the Johns, even Sarah to a certain degree. And the interactive model is that you get all these different disciplines in the room. You get expert speakers on their subject matter. You have hand-selected sponsors who provide the best products and technology. And you create the platform to have them interact through live demonstrations, hands-on stuff, and a lot of moderated Q&A. There's no stupid questions. That's important. That's how people learn. The winter break experience takes that, all right, the whole week between Andy's event and rolling into the Moisture Mob. You have high-level education presented by leading authorities. You provide continuation education credit and all the professional credentials that they need so that they stay abreast of best practices. You give plenty of opportunity to interact and then break bread. Like Cliff said, we put these networking dinners. Some of the dinners are going Dutch people pay their own way. Others with the winter break is included as part of the registration. Everybody's got to go to dinner, so we kind of put that in. So what the premise is this: education backed up by citations, research, and references. Concrete Bob and specifically Ralph really are heavy on that. This enables people to develop accurate protocols, which then ultimately leads to quality workmanship. Then if you add on that, if people, the first part of being a competent professional is to be educated and to be accurate and learn whatever the trade or profession is. Then after that, you have to be ethical, and you should advocate ethical behavior, ethical conduct, and fair business dealings with all the stakeholders and customers. If you do all of that through education and advocacy, then the whole industry of property damage repair, there's 4 or 5 wins here. It isn't a win-win. You have to have a win for the contractors and the people providing the service. You have to have a win for the property owners, the occupants in these buildings. You have to have a win for all the third-party stakeholders, the subject matter experts, the other people that are called in on the project. And then you have to have a win for the organizations who bear the bulk of the cost to repair these buildings, which are insurance companies, it could be the government, the FEMA, and in a lot of cases, it's these self-insured entities. And you know, when one of the last things that Cliff put on the blog that, you know, will go out with his notes from this is he put in the blog this time, a little subtitle called Public Discussion. I've actually never seen Cliff put that in there. And the way we closed the winter break, for those of you that were there in the room at the end, well, the first thing is we actually had Trimix again had a drawing for one of their multi-purpose meters. It's over $1,000 meter. Everyone, all the paid attendees, the person who won it was Ramona Gallagher, who is a content special estimate evaluator, and she's a public adjuster in 6 different states. And she was so happy. She said, "I'm going to take this meter with all the other public adjusters and, you know, show my new toy, educated." So it was kind of coincidental there that to be educated in that area. But that old thing saying, which I learned many, many years ago, was don't tell me, sell me, right? If you tell somebody something, they look at suspicion. But if you sell them by providing the facts, the opinion in a clear, logical way, well, what that does, and Marty King established this 45 years ago when the fire and the water people first started developing under the old RAA brand, old ASCR, said if you provide quality work, have ethical business practices, and are fair with people, not only does it benefit the contractor, it benefits the homeowner, and it benefits the general public and the insurance companies who primarily pay for the bulk of the cost. So at the end of the day, that is the purpose of all these educational and networking events, and that should be the message of the industry. And the people that run afoul of that, well, I'll leave it to, you know, how they want to be handled. But we, and whatever part of the industry we're in, we can improve it by our daily actions, what we say, what we endorse. And if we speak out against things that are wrong, that are inaccurate, or people are unethical, I mean, a lot of that's interpretable, don't get me wrong. And people know if they're doing the right thing or they're not doing the right thing, and we'll leave it at that. But Joe, one thing before you close out, if Stanley's still on here, I think it'd be great if you gave him the floor for a minute as the person who's going to be the IAQA president, who's been in the industry for years and attended the entire week. I think it'd be nice if he wanted to weigh in. I see he's still here. Could we open him up, Grayson?
I don't see him on here right now, though, Pete.
Yeah, it says Stanley. I see him right on the screen.
Oh. Stanley, can you join us?
Yeah, go ahead and unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Hey, Stanley.
Go ahead and unmute yourself. Unmute, Stanley.
You're okay. I'm unmuted. You got.
There he is. Hey, Stanley, how are you?
If you want to see my old face.
Not a problem, buddy. So great to see you. Great to talk to you. Any final thoughts from you on Pete's event down there? There you are.
Wow. It's a lot to unpack. Thanks for putting me on the spot. I always appreciate it. One of the things that struck me about this the conference and the takeaways, and I've actually been a big proponent of this, is not only did you have the science and the esoteric concepts behind a lot of things, at the beginning from Joe Steebrook, John Stroud, but then you got into the nuts and bolts of the practical and what's going on in the moisture mobs, like the roofing. And I don't see that a lot. I don't see the hands-on. How do people, and this I discovered, I guess 35 years ago. How do I get the hands-on training for using and techniques? Yeah, you'll get a little instruction book, and then you'll kind of get maybe a little training, from various people. But it's hard to get a comprehensive set of what's going wrong, what's the false moisture readings. And I've done some teaching throughout the years, and I really like that. You got that from the presenters, and I've always been a proponent of bringing that into IAQA, at our pre-conference shops. Like, I did a 4-hour moisture meter class with various materials. But I think that was really good, and a good combination. John Lapotaire, John really brings a lot because he has the basic construction knowledge, being a contractor, building, and then doing investigations. And, it's hard to put together the basic knowledge of so many areas of construction to understand the building and then understand the indoor air quality, the moisture problems. People come in with drawing, restoration, a little maybe construction, so they get the restoration training, but there's so many parts of that building to understand. So I know we're running short on time, so I'll just wind up with that.
Great to see you, Stanley. Thanks for joining us. I also want to thank this week's guests, Andy Osk, Sarah Fanger, Darren Foote, John T. Hall, John Lapotaire. By the way, just go to the search box on IAQ Radio, punch in any of those names, and you can go back to the old shows and learn what these are people that have learned over the years. They've been really generous in sharing their knowledge, and we really appreciate it. I also want to thank the Z-Man, Grayson, Gone Fish and Fisher at the controls, and of course, the restoration industry global watchdog, Pete Consigli. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We've got the CEO of the Allergy and Asthma Foundation of America, Mr. Ken Mendez, joining us. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks with the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.